My name is Ethel Magaña-Lopez. I work at the Rape Crisis Center, and I work in education. And our team is focused on primary prevention, right? So this is typically what we do. We go out into the community to talk to, really whoever will have us in their space, to talk about our role in the community to ending sexual violence, right? So today's gonna be a very big overview of understanding sexual violence. We're gonna touch up on different themes and topics and concepts. And then we're gonna talk about our role in the community and how we improve our response to help survivors. I kind of want to get an idea of who's in the room, right? So I got a little bit of an overview before I started. So I just want a raise of hands. If you are in the social work field. Excellent. In counseling. Okay. In the medical field? Anybody from the medical field? Excellent. Thank you so much for being here. To everybody, there's a reason that we're here, right? And there's a reason that y'all signed up for this training. There's a reason that we are sitting here trying to improve our response and learn about sexual violence. Right, and we'll touch up on that as we go along. I do want to go over our objectives real quick. Okay, the three things that we're going to be focusing on today is defining the realities of sexual violence, identifying the barriers and the challenges that survivors face to reporting, and also clarifying our role in the community as community members and first responders. Some acknowledgements before we get started on the actual presentation. I want to acknowledge gendered language. Right? And it's something so common in our everyday language. That sexual violence, there's this myth that it only happens to women and that men are the perpetrators. And sometimes in our daily language, we facilitate that and perpetuate it by saying, when we refer to victims, we just say she was doing this, she was doing that, he was doing that, he was doing that. The he's and the she's, the pronouns that we choose in our everyday language have a big impact. Right? So when we are talking about victims and survivors, which is the next one, I'm going to be using that interchangeably. Right? So sometimes I'll say victim, sometimes I'll say survivor. They mean the same thing, but it depends the audience that you're talking to. Right? So first responders and law enforcement are trained to call them victims. Right? They're a victim of crime. From an advocate point of view, we call them survivors, right? Because this is something that has happened to them, and they are pushing through, they're finding their hope, and they're finding their healing. They have survived this incident. Right? So you'll hear me using both. Also, be aware of your personal biases. Right? So take a moment to think about your own power, your own privilege, and your own space that you take up in your everyday life. Right? And when you walk in through the door, acknowledge your audience, acknowledge your peers, right? And be aware of your own biases. That way, we are creating a safe space for everyone. Right? We are being respectful, and we are acknowledging the different experiences that everyone has had. And lastly, be aware of your own triggers. We are going to be talking about sexual violence in depth. And if there's some content that is disturbing or makes you uncomfortable, please feel free to take a moment for yourself. That is most important. For us to be able to facilitate these conversations and have these discussions, I want you to feel safe and comfortable. So if it's something that is triggering to you, please feel free to take a moment for yourself. Step outside. It will not be offensive to me. I completely understand. That's what we're here for, to create a safe environment, to be able to have these discussions. Another thing I want to say is that I absolutely love the sound of my own voice, so I can talk for days, but what makes this workshop effective is the participation, right? That's what I'm here for, to engage you in these conversations. So there are going to be some activities, there are going to be some prompts, and it would be so helpful if I would get that feedback and that participation so that conversation can grow, and we can grow together from this, okay? So a little bit about the Rape Crisis Center. We offer free agency services, and these are the following here. Crisis intervention, which is something that I worked in for a big part of my time at the Rape Crisis Center. I worked face-to-face with clients. I worked face-to-face with survivors at the hospitals and in the hotline. We have a 24-hour hotline, 365 days a year, open, and there's always a trained advocate on the phone answering the hotline calls. And it's not just for survivors who need immediate help. It's also for friends, family, loved ones, peers, and people in the community who have questions about maybe something that happened, maybe something they're confused about, or maybe resources that they need to give to someone or for themselves. So please feel free to take that number with you. On the chairs, there was some materials. If your chair did not have one, please feel free to take one from an empty chair. It has our hotline number that is 24/7 and a lot of information in depth about our services as well. So keep that number with you. Maybe it's not something that you need, but maybe it's a number that you can hand over to someone else and possibly save a life with that, right? So keep that number with you. Client and counseling services. So we offer free counseling to all community members, to all survivors, and not just primary victims, but also secondary. So this is friends, family, or loved ones who were also affected by the incident. They can also receive free services, and it's unlimited. We have some clients that have gone to just one session and have found their healing and are perfectly fine with just going once, and we have had some that go for many years. It's unlimited. We do not cut off the amount of sessions. We also have case management, so we do have case managers on site for any additional resources, because we do understand that sexual assault is not just a physical or a psychological thing. It comes into so many different elements and affects different parts of your life, right? So if you need services regarding work, right, like employment, education, and schools, possibly housing, financial needs, we have a case manager on site to help you get connected to those resources. And primary prevention and education, which is me, right? We come out into the community, we come into these spaces to facilitate these conversations, to facilitate these safe spaces where we can continue that discussion, right? And work together to find these new solutions to ending sexual violence. On your chair, and if you don't have one, I can get one to you, you should have a little colored piece of paper. We are all here for a purpose, right? We are all here sitting in this room for a reason. I want you to think about the first time that you learned about sexual assault, okay? And write it down on that piece of paper. It doesn't have to be descriptive. It could be a moment in time, a place that you were, you saw it on TV, you heard about it, something happened, okay? So write it down on your piece of paper. Take a moment for yourselves to do that. And you'll notice around the room, I have these posters with a timeline of a year, right? So we have the 1950s, 60s, 70s. On this wall, we have the 80s, 90s, and 2000 and forward. So once you have written your moment in time, if you will please get up, and there's pieces of tape at the bottom of the poster board, and put your piece of paper up on that timeline of when it was. I'm going to share with you the first time that I learned about sexual assault. And it was, I heard it on TV, on a little TV program, I'm sure that we are familiar with, Law and Order SVU. Now, I do not recommend that you get all your education about sexual assault from that TV program, but in that time, 2005, I was sitting in the living room with my parents, and that show just happened to be on. And the second that they said the word rape, my mom switched the channel, and that was the last I ever heard of it. So that was the first time that I had even heard the word. I wasn't fully educated on it, but it was the first time, my first experience hearing it or learning or seeing something about it. The second time that I learned about sexual assault was just a few years later. And it was when my best friend outcried to me. She told me that she had been carrying the secret along with her for a very long time and that she had not told anybody. She told me that someone that she considered a best friend of hers had sexually, forcefully penetrated her, and she wasn't sure what to do about it. And she had been carrying this with her for many, many years. And I was the first person that she told after all these years. And I had no idea what to say. I had no idea what to do. I couldn't even fully comprehend what it meant. And I just did not understand my role in that moment. But I wanted to be a good friend, and I said, it's okay. Thank you for telling me, right? Just thank you for sharing that with me. Let's see who we can talk to about this to get you the help that you need. But it had been many years, and she had already gone through, all these different stages of her life, feeling this guilt, shame, and just being afraid of creating new relationships, of trusting people. But I was so thankful that she told me, right? And that we were able to create that special safe space where she could share that. I would like to have, if someone on this side could please volunteer to read one of the cards that are up on the board. It doesn't have to be the one that you wrote, just one that's close by to you. Thank you.
It says 1986 high school.
1986 high school, okay. And someone over here, please read one of the cards that are on these boards.
1960 church.
At church in the 1960s, okay. And then someone in the back on the 2000 board?
High school.
In high school, in 2000. Okay. Read it in the newspaper right, in the 1970s. We have church attacked by cousin, right, in the 1960s. These are all different experiences, right, different moments in time, almost a snapshot on that timeline, right? We all come from different backgrounds, different experiences, and we've all had some experience with it, right? Whether we just heard it in the newspaper, we read it, we saw it on TV, either someone that we knew was personally affected by it, but that's just the thing, right? That sexual violence affects everyone in the community, right? So it's all of our responsibility to work toward ending it, right? Because even if it's not something that happened to you personally, it still affects everyone in the community, right? Because either someone, you know it happened to them, right? Or you heard about it. It's happening. It's very prevalent, right? And a lot of these have high school, church, right? These are places that we are very familiar with in our daily lives, right? So we all have a responsibility to raise awareness about it because it's very prevalent. Violence is very prevalent in our daily language, right? In the different things that we say. And they're common phrases, right? For example, if we are standing around, we're waiting for something, we are killing time, right? Or if we're leaving, we're gonna hit the road, right? Or traffic was killer, right? And when we go to bed, we hit the hay, right? Or, you tell me, hit me with your best shot. Let's go, hit me with your best shot. It's so prevalent in our daily language, right? In all of these spaces and all of these experiences, even if it wasn't directly correlated to sexual violence, there's an unhealthy root to it, right, in the things that we say. So that's what we're gonna talk about today, is integrating all of these experiences and all of these voices and coming together to define that role and really clarify, right, and understand sexual violence, the root of it, and how it is that we can work toward ending it. Defining the realities of sexual violence. So we're gonna talk about statistics, laws, and myths. 1 in 6 women and 1 in 33 men have been raped at some point in their lives. 1 out of 7 married women will be raped by their husband or ex-husbands. And 80% of rape victims are under the age of 30. 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 7 boys will be sexually assaulted or abused at least once by the time they turn 18. And 93% of child sexual abuse survivors know their attacker. Right? So that's busting another myth, that it's not always that stranger, right, or that person that you're not familiar with at, at a social scene or hiding in an alley, right, or dressed a certain way, or someone that you don't know. This is happening with acquaintances, friends, and family, right? 93% of those survivors of sexual abuse knew their perpetrator. So this was someone in their home, at their school, in their friendship circles, in their social circles. So we need to be aware of that, be cognizant that in our daily language, when we talk about sexual violence, it's not just wrist reduction, right? Cover your drink, walk with your keys in between your knuckles, walk with a friend, go in a well-lit area. Yes, those things do help, right? Because it is still happening. But be cognizant that that's not the only place it's happening. It's prevalent in the homes and schools and in social circles, right? So be cognizant of that when you are talking to your audiences, to your peers, and to survivors, right? That we understand that this is something very close. So defining rape and sexual assault. I want to ask y'all, are rape and sexual assault the same thing? Do they mean the same thing?
I'm assuming they mean something different in court of law, maybe.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So legally, okay, like in the penal code, how it's written. In our community, do they mean the same thing? When someone's talking about rape, when someone's talking about sexual assault, are they referring to the same crime? Yeah, sometimes. You're right. In the penal code, right, so in Texas, it says sexually assaulted, right? So in legal terms, there is a difference because it's not in the penal code. It's not in the court system. It's not in the legal language. But in our community, it does mean the same thing, right? They do mean the same thing. It's just how it's written in the legal code. But I'm going to be using them to mean the same thing because they are. I think that typically people identify sexual assault with something without penetration, a crime without penetration, and rape that there was penetration, but we're busting that as well, right? So we are talking about the same thing. And I'll be using it interchangeably, right? So get comfortable with both of those terms, because when, depending on your audience, right, whichever client that you're working with or the audience that you're speaking to, be able to identify that there is no difference between those words, but it's in our language. We write that narrative, right? So how we decide to talk about these things. We're going to cover some of the laws in the Texas Penal Code, right? So sexual assault is defined by any penetration, be it oral, anal, or vaginal, with any sex organ or any object by any one person against another without consent. And right under, you'll see the consequences to this, right? The fines, up to a $10,000 fine, 2 to 20 years, it's a second-degree felony. And what's really a good thing to point out about the Texas Penal Code is that this one does include all orifices, because there are some states that do not have oral, or do not have anal, and that could be problematic, right, to various members of the community, right, that if it doesn't include that, it will not be prosecuted, right? But Texas does, so that's a good thing about the Texas Penal Code. Aggravated sexual assault, it's the same as the previous definition, but it becomes aggravated when there is serious bodily injury or attempt to cause death, use of a deadly weapon, the victim is kidnapped or abducted, and there's more than one perpetrator. Victim is under 14 years old, and victim is over 65 years old. Now, can anyone tell me why those specific ages have been identified? Why would it be, aggravated if they're under 14 or aggravated if they're over 65? Pardon? Yeah, so vulnerability, right? This is a vulnerable population. Minors, and then anyone over 65, right? So they can be taken advantage of. It's a vulnerable population. And that's good that they include that there, right? Because there could be little, these various details, right? That if it's not listed in there, it could be very problematic, right? For various members of our community. That's a first-degree felony, 5 to 99 years, and $10,000 fine. Sexual assault of a minor. So this is if the victim is 14, 15, or 16 years old and willingly engages in sexual activities with someone 3 or more years older than them. So this one gets a little tricky to understand. So the 3 years and older, and I have a diagram here for y'all. This is what is typically referred to as statutory rape, right? So this is someone who is 3 years older than the minor and is in a relationship with them. And even though the minor willingly engages in sexual contact and sexual activity, they are not of legal age to consent, right? So it is rape. But if you look at this chart here, right? So if they're under 14, the penal code says no, right? There is no affirmative defense. 14, 15, and 16, if they are willing and the perpetrator, right, is 3 years of age, they can get affirmative defense. But that's up to the discretion of law enforcement, right, when they open up this investigation. Right, so this is if a parent, someone at school, someone in the community reported this, right, that they are in a relationship with someone, if they know a minor is. 17, they can legally consent to sex. Okay, but so if they're 15 and the perpetrator is 16, 17, 18, again, it's up to law enforcement discretion, but they could get affirmative defense by willingly engaging in that, right?